Well, now we move on to the core of our repertoire. That's to say what we're going to play against knight f3, and I'm going to recommend Petrov's defence, knight f6. This has an unjustifiably dry reputation at club level, but it's my impression that whereas club players are only too ready for lines of the Ruy Lopez or some sharp gambit ideas, they're not as well prepared against the Petrov, so we can use this to our advantage at lower levels to score lots of points. Don't forget that in days gone by, the Petrov has been used by serious tacticians as a way of sharpening things up in the open game. And it's not at all a dry opening. This is a very wrong perception of this aggressive counter-attacking defence. So the Petrov it will be. There are a couple of ways for white to try and throw back off the scent. One of these is to play knight c3 in this position and to try and go back into a dry version of the four knights. Of course, the nice thing about employing this move order from black's perspective is he generally avoids the four knights. And I'm going to recommend that black go with bishop b4 here. Again, this is a very reasonable move, obviously leading to some sort of Ruy Lopez in reverse, but it's very much in keeping with the spirit of the open game. Black gets his pieces out quickly. He probably has to give up the bishop pair in this variation, but I think it's a good solid choice and avoids some of the dreary lines of the four knights. Well, the first game comes from the Tringov Memorial, played in February 2012 between Sergeyev Petrov and Nikolai Milchev, international master, playing with black. Well, the critical move here is knight takes e5, so we're going to look at this first, and now black cheerfully gambits a pawn temporarily with castles. White is ill-advised to try and hang on to this pawn. Well, I don't think he can, in fact. Well, okay, he can do so with a move like d3, but the problem with d3 is after d5, black is already opening up the game, and white's knight is in a precarious situation on e5. So I think this position is actually good for black, with a direct threat of, well, d4 or d takes e4. That's why white tends to play safe in this position by either dropping his knight back to d3 immediately, which we're going to see next, or just bishop e2. Well, Milchev played rook e8, this is the game. Black's bishop was attacked with the knight. Black doubles the pawns and now plays knight takes e4. So we reach a situation of imbalance here, where white has obtained the bishop pair early, but in return black's saddled white with double pawns. The danger to black in this type of position is long term. White's two bishops will start to show their strength. Hopefully that's what white's hoping for as the game progresses. It's black's job to try and neutralise the two bishops, and the usual way you do this in the opening is to try and establish a very strong pair of knights in the centre of the board. Obviously knight f4 by white stopped black from playing d5, so black's had to find a different way of orchestrating his position. He's getting ready to put his knights in the centre of the board and hold off the white bishops. White tries to block the queen side here. Black puts his knight on c5, and now this uncomfortable move f3. But of course, you know, black is pretty comfortably placed here. I mean, if white goes with a move like bishop e3, black just plays bishop f5. There's nothing wrong with black's position here. Nice comfortable development. Okay, white's got the bishop pair, but then again double pawns. This is fine for black. So white went f3, an uncomfortable looking move, and black put his knight on g5. b3, queen f6 attacking the rook, rook moves, and now c6, keeping the white knight out of d5. Knight to d3 was answered by bishop f5, and queen d2 attacking the knight by queen d4 check, king in the corner, h6. Well, if white is looking to get something from this position, he's got to try to activate this bishop. The dark square bishop is the piece that black doesn't possess. So white puts his bishop on the long diagonal. It looks actually more dangerous than it is. Black brings his queen to h4. The knight comes to f4, and now black plays knight g e6, whereupon there's an exchange of minor pieces. You can see how white's being held at bay here by black's good centralisation. Bishop d3. Okay, well the white player was much lower rated than black, so he's quite happy to angle for a draw. Black decides to keep some imbalance in the position, retaining a knight over a bishop, and now he doubles up. Nice easy play, and rook e2 is the threat. g3, I think white's starting to drift in this position. He can't think what to do. The only thing he can do it seems, is to push the black queen back to a less aggressive square and now stop rook e2. Black moves in with rook e3. Now white has numerous pawns under attack, and queen takes a5 was answered by queen g6. Black is busy connecting his position, and white's pieces are very uncoordinated. That's why Petrov plays rook b f1. Ironically, white player is called Petrov himself. Running into a knight fork, rook d2 is answered by c5 and queen c7 by rook e2. So now black is thinking about a serious and winning attack. Queen f5, queen d8 check, and now queen f8 was answered by f6, blocking the checkmating threat. Queen takes d6, knight f2 check. Now it's starting to get very, very nasty. Well, if king g1 in this position, I think we've got knight h3 check, king h1 only move, and then queen c2, without a shred of counterplay for white, and black is checkmating by force, I think. So rook takes f2 was played in the game. Rook takes f2, queen d1, rook takes f3. Obviously black could have taken with the queen, that's another easy win. Bishop e1, rook takes b3. I think black decided to go on a mop-up job here. White can't take the rook, it's mate on f1, but this is, again, convincing. So a nice way to start. I think you will see that actually this move, bishop b4, is a very reasonable reply to the four-knight way of playing by white. There now follows another high-level clash in this line, the three knights variation, where black plays bishop b4, aiming for a reverse Ruy Lopez, and it will demonstrate conclusively the solidity of black's concept and setup. In order to get anything against this line, white's got to take on e5, and we know now that black is temporarily sacrificing this pawn. It will be unwise for white to try and keep this pawn. Well, in fact, he can't without incurring a major disadvantage. So what we get is a typical position here, where white drops his knight back, allowing black to double the pawns, and now black takes on e4. Castles. What does black do next? Well, Lichau solves the problem elegantly by just playing d6. His aim initially is just to get his pieces out fluidly and to coordinate his position. White understands that an advantage in this position is long term. It's going to come from the two bishops. Nimzowitsch said, open up the position slowly when you get the two bishops early. So bishop f1 conforms to that idea. Black now plays a very solid move, h6, and after c4 he plays b6, fixing the queenside pawns, getting ready for bishop b7. This is coordination at work. Well, white played f3, black played knight ec5, and now white continued to keep a very slight edge here, but nothing life-threatening here with bishop f4. Bishop b7, you can see everything is nice and solid on the queen side, and now white plays queen e1. So evidently he thinks he can still screw out some sort of an advantage from this coming endgame. But black defends very competently. He just takes on e1, knight e6 blocking the e file. No way does white want to allow black to take that bishop, then it really would be absolutely nothing. And now another very good move here, a5, not only keeping the white knight out of b4, but also, as you can see, covering the maximum number of squares. And I've indicated a good plan for black now. His plan is probably something like king to f8, rook to e8, knight ec5. So it transpires in the game, both sides bring their king up, bishop c3, rook e8, g3, and now another good move here, f6. Just blunting the bishop out of the game. That's the way to play when you're playing against the two bishops, when you've got bishop and knight. White played bishop h3, a dangerous looking diagonal, but after knight c5, black has got everything coordinated and protected. There were some more exchanges. Clearly this game is heading to a draw, and Yu Yang Yi just accepted it here. He took on c5, and the game now drifted to a complete draw in the opposite colour bishop ending. There are a few more token moves. There's really nothing going on. Draw agreed. So a brief game, but again an instructive game, and the way black deployed his pieces here was something to learn from. If white decides to meet the Petrov with this rather boring knight c3 move order, then the solidity of bishop b4 cannot be denied. We've seen plenty of games now where black has got a solid position. And just to finish off this section, I'm going to show you a game from the Dutch Team Championship played in 2011 between Rafael Friedman, grade 2488, and the veteran grandmaster Arthur Yusupov. If Yusupov uses this continuation with black, that to me guarantees its validity. Well, we know what happens now. White takes this pawn on e5, black gives it up happily. White should not keep the pawn, and now black gets the opportunity to regain the pawn, but on the other hand he's ceded the bishop pair. Knight f4 prevents black from playing d5. Black plays rook e8, well, white's got to block the e-file, and now comes d6, and then knight d7. Yusupov brought his knight across to f6. So black is countering the bishop pair with strong squares for the knights in the centre, and white played rook e1, and now this idea of putting the bishop on b7, b6, c4, and now bishop b7. Bishop f3, and black just completes his development by manoeuvring the queen up to f5. So a very characteristic position for this line, where white has got the bishop pair, but actually in the position nothing much to speak of. Black's got all his pieces on good squares. The only slight tactical problem is how does he resolve the difficulty of this pin knight on e4. White's trying to exploit this by playing knight e2. Black plays rook a b8. That's making sure the bishop is protected. And now after knight c3, Yusupov just dropped back prophylactically with queen g6. In view of the 100-point rating discrepancy between the two players, white was probably happy with this, and he just took off the knight on e4. Rook e2 was answered by rook e6, and both players massed their rooks in the e-file. Really, this is simple fare, easy to understand. After king f1, black made a token attempt to take the initiative here with h5, and after bishop c1, Yusupov played h4. White stopped the pawn dead in its tracks, and now Yusupov played his pawn up to f5. So clearly black is playing for the win in a rather dry position. White played b3, and now black played rook 6 e7. That's a kind of waiting move here. I don't think Yusupov could see really what to do, so he just makes a flexible move. I suppose an added benefit of that move is that it defends g7, freeing up the black queen should white ever get the opportunity to play his bishop to b2 and then put some pressure against g7. Queen d4 starts the ball rolling. c5, a continuation of black's ambition. Queen d3 was answered by rook d7. Yusupov's looking for an active plan. He's thinking about d5. So king g1, taking away some tactics. Queen f6, preventing bishop b2. All sorts of small skirmishes going on. And now white takes on e4. Well, that's a clear sign that white is happy with the draw. Black, meanwhile, still feels he's slightly better and plays on with f takes e5 and then d5. White takes, black takes back with the rook, queen f4, and now king h7. So white's playing this well. I think he's now nullified any black initiative that there was, and after queen takes f6, g takes f6, the game is just heading for a draw. White played f3, black brought his king up. White even got the chance to win a pawn in this position with f takes e4. Note not rook takes e4 here because of rook d1 check. But after f takes e4 it's burning out. Rook e5, black's getting his pawn back. And after bishop b8, the two players agreed to a draw. An absolutely typical game in this line between two very strong players. I think we can conclude, going back to the opening, that the three knights with knight c3 and then bishop b4 is a very satisfactory way to play with black. At club level, I think you're going to almost always get a decent position. The idea to remember is this one of bringing the knight around with knight d7 and then knight df6. And Yusupov showed in this game that you may complete development with b6 and bishop b7. Well, we move on now to the Petrov itself, and the way I want to organise the material is as follows. Basically, after 2 knight f6, there are two distinct main lines. White either plays d4 straight away, or he takes on e5, and I'm going to deal with all those lines in the first two sections. Then at the end, we'll wrap up with different ways for white to play this position. But by and large, the two main lines are d4 and knight takes e5. So we'll look at d4 first. Now black can take on d4, but I think his most reliable move here is knight takes e4. So that's the line I'm going to recommend to you. This is the variation which has been played an enormous amount at the highest level of chess. And my first game comes from the Dortmund Super Grandmaster tournament played in July 2012 between Arkady Naiditsch playing white and Vladimir Kramnik playing black. And in this game white went bishop d3, which is the main line, whereupon black just easily protects his knight in the centre with d5, and now white takes on e5 with the knight. So we can safely say this is the absolute main line of the d4 variation. Now black has many moves. In the old days they used to move this bishop on f8 either to e7 or d6, but the modern interpretation starts with knight d7. I see nothing wrong with this move, and if Kramnik uses this idea, it's a guarantee that this particular line is sound. It's positionally well motivated. The white knight on e5 has already moved twice, so black moves to d7 to offer to exchange it off, and thus ease any problems coming out of the opening. Just retracting this move, white might be getting ready for adventures such as queen f3 or queen h5, so knight d7 also nips those moves in the bud. Well, there are a few lines to consider now, but let's look at knight takes d7 first. In my view, black should be pleased to see this move, as it not only helps the black development along, it moves the knight one more time. White castles, black plays bishop d6, and now knight comes out to c3. We'll see there are other moves a bit later on, but for now Kramnik plays queen h4. So this is the type of thing really which players should be playing at club level. Straightforward development, black's bishops pointing at the white king side, the queen comes out, it's all very aggressive and a good way to play with black, a good way to worry your opponent. The only slight concern is black hasn't castled yet, but the mate threats stop white from doing anything about that. Naiditsch played g3, and now Kramnik played a small intermezzo here, knight takes c3. Not worrying about queen e1 check when black can safely retreat with queen e7. With a reasonable game after queen takes c3, castles. Well, in fact I slightly prefer black here, but clearly this is fairly equal. So going back to knight takes c3, Naiditsch took with the b pawn and Kramnik played queen to g4. He sees rook e1 check coming up and he wants to offer the exchange of queens. Well, king f8. This might seem slightly inconvenient for black, but two pairs of minor pieces have been exchanged and black is planning to use his rooks as follows. That rook on a8 can come across to e8 at a moment's notice, if need be. No reason at all why black should play that move. And he wants to activate this rook on h8 by going h5 and then h4. White played bishop e2, black played queen to g6, and now c4. You're going to see this break a lot in the Petrov, whereby white tries to get rid of the black pawn on d5. The pawn on d5 controls central squares, white exchanges it off. So Kramnik takes, and now he goes h5. Another good move, building up to an initiative on the king side, and even here allowing the capture on b7. Kramnik sacrifices the pawn. Well, Naiditsch sees nothing better than to take it, and now black plays rook e8. White takes, black recaptures, bishop d3, queen h5. Naiditsch played queen e4. Well, this is quite a dangerous position for white. He's way behind in development. Yes, he's a pawn up, but will he ever get to enjoy it? Black has numerous threats. He's got the idea of taking on g3, which is clear. The queen is thinking about penetrating to the back rank. Plenty of compensation. Queen e4 was answered by h takes g3, and after h takes g3, queen d1 check was played, forcing white's reply as king g2 is answered by queen h1 mate. So white's got to go bishop f1. Now comes queen h5, bishop d3 was played, and the two players agreed to a draw after the repetition. Now that might seem dull, but in fact, in its own way, it was quite an exciting game. I suppose the most important feature of that game from our point of view is that black was in no trouble throughout and seemed to have an initiative for the last 10 moves. So summarising, after d4 we're recommending knight takes e4, and in the main line we're going to go knight d7. The Petrov defence can often lead to early tactical jousting. This could prove very uncomfortable for club players who are not altogether familiar with the intricacies of the open game. Such jousting was seen in the very recent game between Sergei Wrublewski playing white and Wang Yui playing with black, a very high level game from the Poikovsky-Karpov tournament in Siberia, played on the 4th of October 2012. And conveniently for us, it's another example of our line where black is playing with knight d7. As we saw in the last game by Kramnik, this is a very reliable way for black to play. And we're examining the immediate capture on d7. White has many moves here, this is just one of them. And when white plays like this, he's trying to exploit a slight looseness in the black formation early on. And Wrublewski tried to do this by playing the immediate queen h5. Clearly black would like to castle in this position, but then the pawn on d5 is tender. Wang Yui played a surprising move, but a very good one here, queen to f6. This is a good idea where black puts counter pressure on the pawn at d4. Of course, when black plays in this way, he has to have a good idea what happens in the complicated positions to follow, because white has castled and black hasn't, and black must always respect this situation. Now the point of this continuation is that if white takes on d5, black's planning to answer with bishop c6. It's actually not out of the question here that black might castle on the queen side, but for the time being white's got to move his queen, and when he does, this enables black to capture on d4. This is a typical example of the tactical jousting I was referring to earlier. And well, black is very much hoping that white can't do anything immediately to take advantage of the fact that black hasn't castled. For instance, white can't play rook e1 here because of queen takes f2. So with rook e1 not available, then white's got to find other ways. Presumably black is just threatening to complete his development with castles and then, let's say, rook a e8. Well, knight d2 is probably the best move according to the computer, and then black can castle. If white continues to try to play tricks on black by playing, for instance, a move like queen h4, putting black in a pin, then rook a e8 is a good move. f3 is not possible, and rook d1 is answered by the cold-blooded f5. You can see here that actually white doesn't seem to have achieved anything over the last few moves. Black is the only one coming forward, and that is the story of this line. Perhaps it's not that promising for white. It tends towards a kind of equality, but in this situation actually I wonder whether this position is actually equal. I'm not so sure. I like black's advantage in development and the fact that that bishop on c1's tied down. So a very plausible variation there where white was unable to achieve anything. Going back to the game then, Wrublewski plays knight c3, black took on d4, and white played bishop e3. So this is typical open game strategy. We're not grabbing hot pawns, we're concentrating on developing our pieces. White understands the best he can get here out of this position is equality. After queen e5, black's forcing the exchange of queens, white takes on d5, and now knight f6 with a completely level position. It's not out of the question here that black can castle on the queen side, I should stress this. So white played rook a e1, trying to make something out of nothing. Knight takes d5 and now bishop d2. Wrublewski of course understands he's going to get the piece back. Black is going to sell him that piece on his terms. Knight takes f4, bishop takes f4, and now castles. And white is left scratching his head, wondering how he could possibly extract anything from this position. Well, the truth of the matter is, he probably can't. He tucks black's king up in the corner. That might be useful for the endgame, but Wang Yui holds easily enough. He just trades off the rooks and goes rook e8. Takes, takes. There's no real advantage in this bishop endgame for white, despite the fact that white's king is closer to the centre than black's. So we now get a very quiet period of play, where basically black just brings up his king. Bishop d5 was answered by b6, and bishop e4 by h5. White only has a very nominal edge here, which black can easily nullify, just like this. So king up to e5, h4 takes, takes, and the two players agree to a draw. So another game which, and from the highest level I might add, which suggests that knight takes d7 is not white's best route to any sort of opening advantage. Now, when you play 5 knight d7, I do not want you to be surprised when white plays knight takes f7. Occasionally you're going to get an opponent who plays this dangerous looking move, a move which obviously has similarities with the Cochrane Gambit. That's e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes e5, d6, and then knight takes f7. Clearly white's idea is that he wants to land a check after king takes f7, queen h5. Whether this leads to any more than a draw is open to question, but I'm not sure we want to be here with black. So I'm going to recommend a move which should probably also lead to an equal position, or indeed a draw, and has done on many occasions at Grandmaster level, but which keeps a spark of life in the position. That's queen to e7, and if white is not ready for this counter shot, he could easily lose the game. I think knight takes f7 was an idea of Igor Zaitsev or maybe Gurgenidze. Not sure who was the originator of this idea, but queen e7 is a dangerous counter-attacking move. Now, to show you how this all works, I've chosen a brief game from the USA Championship played in St. Louis in 2009 between Julio Becerra Rivero and Melikset Kachayan. Both of these players are graded in excess of 2,500. Very strong players. And in this game, white played the seemingly impossible looking move, knight takes h8. Now, the first point to note is that if white retreats his knight, knight e5, then this is absolutely nothing. Black just takes on e5 twice, and I slightly prefer black in this position, as castles is going to be answered by bishop to d6. Black seems to have the initiative here, completely free of charge. Now, queen e2 was touted as a possible refutation of this line, and there was a famous game, Gurgenidze versus Belin, played in Tbilisi in 1977. Where Belin played king takes f7 here, and now white went queen h5 check, Belin went king f6, and white castled and got a really dangerous attack. Again, I don't think we should touch this with the black pieces. I don't want my king on f6 on move 8. But much better for black, and a clear improvement over this game, is queen takes f7. This leads to a very reasonable position. For instance, if white plays f3, we go knight df6, f takes e4, bishop g4. Black is concentrating on development above everything else, an important tenet of the open game. And after queen e3, d takes e4, bishop takes e4, castles, has excellent compensation for a pawn here. I wouldn't like to be white. Black is getting the initiative. Now, black can actually get his pawn back when white castles queen d7. There are severe problems for white here, with ideas such as queen takes d4 and rook e8. And if white goes bishop d3, we can take the pawn straight away, there's nothing wrong with that, or we can simply play for the initiative after rook e8 and then bishop d6. This is the best way to meet queen e2. Just queen takes f7. Now, in the game Becerra Rivero versus Kachayan, white took on h8, and this leads to a forcing sequence which probably forces a draw. I mean, it looks catastrophic for white at first sight. Knight c3 discovered check, knight takes queen, but this doesn't actually win the queen. White can recuperate with rook e1. A crazy position is reached after knight takes f2, bishop takes h7. This is the saving grace. Knight e4 check, and now rook takes e4. This move actually bails white out here. Not bishop takes e4, because then knight c3, queen g5, and then queen h5 is not good enough for white. Black wins this position. So rook takes e4, d takes e4, and now the drawing mechanism, quite unusual, bishop g6 check, king d8, knight f7 check, and this is how the game Becerra Rivero versus Kachayan finished. King e8, knight d6 check, king d8, knight f7 check. Draw agreed. In fact, this drawing mechanism is used in many Grandmaster draws when they just want to finish the game quickly. This is one of the stock games. But it's no less interesting because of that, as there are some unusual tactical shots. So to summarise, going back to knight d7, knight takes f7 is not dangerous, but there are some tricks for both sides. King takes f7 may lead to a draw straight away after queen h5 check. I'm recommending we keep as much life in the position as is possible by playing queen e7. I think we should by now be coming to see the move knight d7 as a very good neutralising weapon, and entirely logical too. Black threatens to exchange off a piece which is only moved once for a piece which is moved twice. That is to say, the knight on e5. So if white exchanges on d7, he or she loses time. We now come to the game Kosteniuk versus Humpy Conru, two of the strongest female players in the world, and this was played in the Female Rapid World Championship in May 2012, so a very recent game. And here Kosteniuk played something original, knight to c3. Well, it's totally clear that this move promotes exchanges, so you would think that black would be very comfortable just simply by exchanging off all the knights. And that's exactly what Conru does. But white's idea is to use the pawn on e5, which gives her a slight advantage in space, to create a kingside attack, probably beginning with the move queen h5. So black's got to be a bit careful on the king side in this position. On the other hand, of course, white's pawn structure is nothing to write home about, so if black can weather the initial storm, there should be good chances against the pawn structure a little later on. But for the time being, white's got slightly more freedom of movement. Well, the nice thing about black's position is you can get away by playing the most natural moves in the world. So bishop c5 is what Conru played, and Kosteniuk decided to castle. Clearly there is some mileage in this position in playing the immediate queen h5. I think that's the most dangerous move, and black has to be careful against it. I think most accurate is to play g6 here, with the point that if white goes queen h6, which looks a bit dangerous, black goes bishop f8. Black is going to redeploy her pieces, queen e7 first, and then bishop g7, giving black a very satisfactory game. Black castles next, bishop comes to e6, pawn up to c5, a nice structure for black. So Conru is happy to allow that. So Kosteniuk castles, black castles, queen comes out to h5 in what white hopes are improved circumstances. Black gives the queen a nudge and then plays the important move rook e8. Not only attacking the pawn on e5, but allowing black to play bishop f8, which more or less blunts white's attack. So basically white has nothing here at all. And the nice thing from black's perspective is that she has neutralised white's attack by playing the most natural moves possible. White can't play f4 obviously. She tries bishop g5, again a move which promotes exchanges. Black's very happy to see the pieces coming off in this position, because that brings her closer to a winning endgame. And now white has to find some sort of an attack here. So she starts with rook a e1. Black plays c5. Again, a very logical looking move. And now white plays c4, hoping to dissolve the double pawns. And black has to be a little bit careful, because if she goes d4 in this position, which looks fairly logical, then white has moves like rook h4 in the offing, with rook e4 to begin with. So much more logical is to take on c4. Obviously there are other moves. I mean, black can play bishop e6 in this position, there's nothing wrong with that. And if white plays f4, d takes c4, bishop e4. This is obviously going to be a little bit more dangerous for black, because she has to weaken her king side with f5. White takes, opening up lines, takes on b7. Black should have enough activity in this position to compensate for the fact that actually now it's her who's got the worst pawn structure. But I can see why black doesn't go in for this. This entails a little bit of risk. Meanwhile in the game, d takes c4 looks very good. Bishop takes c4, bishop comes out to f5, very good. White has nothing here. c3, and now another very natural move, rook a d8. White played rook e3, black played queen f8, and now the game finished by perpetual attack on the white queen. Obviously white doesn't want the queens off now because of rook d2, and so the game finished conveniently in a draw. So I think we can, going back to knight d7, determine that knight c3 is not a really dangerous move. Black has to show a modicum of care once all the knights are being exchanged, but should be able to defend this position fairly comfortably. Now we come to a move for white which at times has threatened to refute the variation with knight d7. That is to say, queen to e2. This move creates tactical possibilities for white on the e-file, and possibly obliges black to sacrifice a pawn. And the way black does this is to take on e5, white takes on e4, you can see the tactical possibilities coming about. Black recaptures, white likewise, and now bishop e6, a good move which gives black compensation for the upcoming sacrificed pawn. And the first move we're going to look at here is queen takes e5. Some old analysis from Larsen is quite interesting here, after d takes e5, and black should now play bishop d5 with a skewer against the queen and the pawn on g2. When white puts his queen on g4, as he must, now black plays h5. White scurries back to h3, and now queen to e7 is a good move. And Larsen's old analysis continues, f4, and now a slightly unstereotyped move here, but a very good one, queen e6, a move by which black exchanges off white's only active piece. After queen takes e6 check, f takes e6 castles, you would think that white is escaping. But bishop c5 check, king h1, and now castles on the queen side, gives black ongoing compensation. And the analysis from Larsen continues, knight c3, bishop c6, f5, rook d4, and then with the idea of rook h4 or g4, white goes h3 to stop it. It turns out it doesn't stop it. Rook g4 continues to give black a fantastic attack. We'll look a little bit more at d takes e5 later on, but let's concentrate on queen takes e5 first, which is the mainline move. And now black gets ready to castle on the queen side with queen to d7. There's also an upcoming tempo available with bishop d6, although of course that's going to involve more sacrificing, as the pawn on g7 would hang. Well, we're going to see a game a little later, a very interesting game between Karpov and Larsen from Tilburg in 1980, which more or less propelled this line with knight d7 into the limelight. And there, white castled and black castled, promoting a very sharp struggle. As I say, we'll see that a little bit later on. But now let's concentrate on the game Ardeleanu versus Tanchik, and this game was played in the Centre Open in July 2012, where white played bishop to e3. Black played bishop d6, and obviously if white takes on g7 here, then castles on the queen side comes, and white is really lagging in development. So Ardeleanu played a strange looking move here, queen to a5. Black now played a clever move, bishop d5, and white walked straight into black's idea. He castled. I don't think Ardeleanu, who's a 2-3-3-5 player, saw black's next move, otherwise he certainly wouldn't have allowed it. Black played bishop takes g2. A very strong move indeed, giving you an idea of the tactical possibilities inherent in this line. And the point is, first of all, if white takes, he gets downed immediately with queen g4 check, and then queen h3. Well, what is white to do against queen takes h2, mate? If he plays f4, the bishop on e3 is gone. So Ardeleanu played rook e1, which is rather desperate, and now again black played a very clever move here, queen to g4, allowing all manner of discovered checks from the bishop on e3. But the point is, of course, when white gives a discovered check, black responds in kind with a discovered check of his own. Very unusual mechanism. I haven't seen this too often, especially at this early stage in the game. This was the course of Ardeleanu versus Tanchik. White blocked, black threatens mate, whereupon white has to give up the exchange. Rook takes e4, queen takes e4, knight to c3. But it's very hard to see how white can get satisfactory compensation in this position. Admittedly, the black king is still stuck in the middle, but there shouldn't be enough for the exchange. Please note, just dropping back one move, that if white plays queen b5 check here, black has the easy move, queen c6. So knight c3 was played, black dropped back, and now white played bishop takes d6. Most players in this position would certainly play rook e1 check, and after king f8, probably d5. Now black has the choice of going queen d7, which is going to reach a similar position to the game, or he can even play the ending after queen b6. White might have a very, very small chance to draw this game by just laming the black pawn structure, something like this, but after rook e8, well, black is still the exchange up as far as I can see without too much compensation. Just in case you were wondering, this rook can easily come into the game via h5 and rook h6, and we're going to see this idea in the game. So going back, white took on d6 and gave it check, king f8. As I say, no big deal, because the a rook can come into the game via e8, and the rook on h8 can come into the game via h6. So no worries for black about the rooks. White hit the queen, black dropped back, queen b4, and now h5. There we are. So white is struggling now against the combined firepower of the black rooks. Rook e2 was answered by rook g6 check, and king f1 by the very natural move, rook e8. White only has a very, very small chance to draw this position, despite the fact that black's still got a little bit of work to do before he finally achieves total coordination. But queen f5 was a definite step in the right direction. The black queen becomes maximally active on this square, and, well, white's got to watch out for c2. White played queen d4, and black now played king f8. Queen takes a7 was answered by queen takes h3 check. King e2, queen g4 check. You can see what's happening here. White is desperately struggling against the combined firepower of the queen and rook. Having got his queen into a nice position, Tanchik plays another good move here, king g8. And after queen takes b7, now he starts to concentrate on direct attack. Please note, black also has a very strong trump in the guise of the passed pawn on h5. Queen c8 check was answered by king h7 and queen h3 by g6. King g2 was answered by rook f5 and a4 by queen f4. All the way along the line, white's got to worry about the safety of his king. He played queen e3, black played rook g5 check. King f1, queen g4. Black combines the idea of active play for his pieces with a direct attack on the white king. Queen g3 was answered by queen c4 check. Black gradually improves the position of his queen by this mechanism, and now rook e5 check, knight e2. Finally, black starts cashing in on the activity of his pieces. King d2, queen b4 check, knight c3, queen f4 check, king d1, queen takes f2. Another pawn bites the dust. Well, these are the last rights really for white's position. Queen d2, h4, queen e1, and now black just exchanged, whereupon white resigned. So, going back, queen e2 is a dangerous move. We're going to be concentrating on it for some weeks to come, but for the time being, black should exchange off the pieces on the e file and then go bishop e6 and be willing to sacrifice a pawn. Possibly the most straightforward move for white once black has played his knight to d7 is simply to castle. Yet maybe this is too straightforward to allow white much chance of an advantage. I think black's simplest move is to follow his strategy through and take off the dangerous white knight on e5 and then follow up with knight c5. A good move, attacking the bishop. Maybe black's threatening to take that bishop, maybe not, but it's quite an annoying idea for white to have to meet. In general, black's plan is simply to reinforce his d-pawn with c6 and then just to develop his bishops and castle with a very comfortable development plan. We're going to take a look at a game, Papp versus Ehrenberg. Both these players are in the 2500s, and this game was played in the USA in 2010. And there white ignored the attack on his bishop and played knight to c3. Clearly white can retreat the bishop at this stage with a slight loss of time, although this is counterbalanced by the fact that black's knight on c5 has moved 3 times already. Well, against bishop e2, this is hardly dangerous. Black just gets on with his plan, c6, then gets his bishops out with a very comfortable game. Going back to knight c5, f4 has also been played. That was played in the game Kosin-Saver versus Kosteniuk-Tbilisi 2012. And after that, black came out with a very aggressive move here, queen to h4. Although whether this is objectively best, I don't know. This was in a rapid play tournament, a women's, I don't know, World Championship rapid play or something like that. So perhaps black was just simply trying to unbalance the game. But far simpler in this position is just to get on with the plan and play c6. And I really don't see any advantage for white against this idea. Black can go on developing the pieces. If white deploys with knight d2, then black can take the bishop off. Castles. Again, it's very, very hard to see any white advantage at all here. Black's got a queenside and central pawn majority. There are some attacking chances on the king side, based around the move f5, but this move cannot be played immediately due to d4. And as you can see, when the bishop moves, black can take off the f pawn. So given that white can't execute his main idea immediately, black has a very comfortable position and can maybe attack the centre with moves like f6 or maybe f5, just blocking things up. So going back to Pat versus Ehrenberg, white played knight c3 and black removed the bishop and played c6. White played bishop e3, bishop e7, f4, and now seeing the pawns advancing, and f5 is a real threat in this position, black broke things up with f6. Good timing. White thought he saw a tactic. He played e takes f6, bishop takes f6, and now bishop takes a7. An interesting tactical idea based upon the idea of rook takes a7, queen e3 check, forking the rook and the king. However, Ehrenberg had seen this and elected to sacrifice a pawn with castles, and when white retreated the bishop, black had a counter tactic here with bishop f5. Nice move, so that if queen takes f5 here, then bishop d4 check picks up the queen by virtue of a discovered attack. So we can see this as a kind of gambit for momentum. Black plays rook e8. Black's got very good momentum in this position. White thought he was consolidating, but it's not that easy here. Pawn up to d4, and this causes problems for white, tactical problems, as knight e4 is met by bishop takes e4, rook takes e4, and now queen to d5, forking the bishop and the rook. So white played knight e2, black played queen d5 anyway, and no doubt this was planned all along. Suddenly black has another fork here on two unprotected white pieces. White played bishop a3, and black didn't even take on a2. He played the much better move here, queen c4, and then rook e8, centralising his pieces. Of course, white had to play this uncomfortable move, rook c1, to defend his c-pawn. So black really has excellent compensation here for the pawn, because all of white's pieces are simply defending, and f5 doesn't help matters much either, as after bishop f7 white's position becomes even more coordinated. Aside from just lopping off this pawn on a2, black's got plans of advancing the queenside pawns there to swamp the white bishop, and it's worthwhile noting in this position that a move like b3 by white fails to queen a6 when the bishop is skewered against the pawn on a2. So white's got all sorts of coordination problems. He tried queen b4, black took on a2, white took on b7, black re-centralised his queen, and now white played queen b4, h5. Very difficult to meet because the white knight is not really on a very good circuit. Again, white played what looked like very logical moves here, rook e1, black brought his rook into e3. Very strong indeed. Rook takes e3, d takes e3. Now white's got a new problem to contend with, the advancing e-pawn. Queen comes into d6, hoping to swap off. Queen comes into d2, no such luck. Black will swap on his own terms. Queen f4, and now bishop d4. After which white resigned. To the end of this game, white was unable to resolve his problems of coordination. And when you look at the position, it's hard to see any defence at all to the discovered check coming up with e2. So just to summarise, going back to knight d7, I think castles could be comfortably met with knight takes e5 and then knight c5, after which the development plan of c6, bishops out and castles, should give black a nice easy game. Well, just to close our discussion of the line with knight d7, which is a supremely logical move, it seems to me, we come to the game Michael Adams playing with white 2-7-2-8 and black Boris Gelfand 2-7-5-1, both world-class players. This was played in the European Cup in Plovdiv in 2010. We note knight d7 attacks the knight on e5, threatens to exchange it off, and by so doing black gains a development tempo, as the knight on d7 has moved one move less than the knight on e5. Adams castles, black takes on e5, and then he drops his knight back to c5. Given that every move is important in the open game and that quick development is the order of the day, Adams doesn't spend time retreating his bishop, he just plays bishop e3, speeding right along with his own development. Just to review, black's plan in this system is perhaps to take that bishop on d3, to play c6, to play bishop e7 to castle, and then to undermine this pawn on e5. That pawn on e5 is a little bit awkward from black's perspective. It stops him from developing his minor pieces comfortably, but black can easily get rid of it with a well-timed f6. So Gelfand just continues comfortable development with bishop e7, and now white plays f4. As stated before, white's general plan here is to attack on the king side. So black's got to be careful about the advance of this f-pawn. He doesn't want just to allow f5 at the wrong moment, and white gets an initiative. As you might expect, Gelfand is on the ball. He takes the bishop now, and he plays g6. A very careful move here, establishing white squared control. So really you have to ask yourself, how is white going to arrange this move f5, as black seems to have stopped him dead in its tracks? Well, one way you can do this, of course, is to try to play g4 at some point, but as you can see, that move is going to take an awful lot of preparation, and if and when it comes, it's going to weaken white's king position. So that's going to be a very risky procedure to put into operation. Another way of doing this is to manoeuvre this knight on b1 round to g3. However unlikely this may seem, white can do it in 3 moves, knight c3 to e2 to g3. But that costs time, and naturally black is spending this time catching up with development. And even when it gets to g3, black should be able to intercept this plan with a move like f5. So black doesn't really have too many problems in this position. He's just got to be a little bit attentive, that's all. So white did play knight c3, attacking the pawn on d5. Black protected it, and Adams indeed dropped back. So we know what he's going to do now. He's trying to prepare the move f5 with the help of either knight g3 or perhaps knight d4. Black invites the scheme, knight g3, and here Gelfand moves in to intercept it with bishop h4. So that was easy enough. If f5, black's going to take the knight on g3. So bishop c5 was played. Black went rook e8. White parked his king in the corner, and now Gelfand steered the game towards an equal position by taking on g3 and then bishop f5. The pawns attacked on c2, so white played c3, and now black went h5. So against 2 players at the highest level, this really now is heading for a draw. True that black does have some dark square weaknesses around his king, but white isn't really in a good position to exploit these weaknesses. Black's got ideas of his own. For instance, one idea is to push the pawn up to h3, put the bishop in on e4, and suddenly the g2 pawn is looking a bit tender. So Adams stops the pawn from coming on. Gelfand moves his king to a slightly safer square. White does likewise, and here we now see the 2 players just more or less getting ready to shake hands. Gelfand attacks the bishop, bishop drops back, black plays his bishop into e4, and now Adams more or less makes an offer of a draw with queen h4. There's no real advantage in this situation for either player, as it's hard for white to enforce the move f5. Well, I know many players here would simply play the move c5. Possibly then Adams was thinking about moving his bishop into f6 and following up with g4. That would be one way for white to keep the game going. So now a very good move by Gelfand. He plays f5. Now at first sight that looks like a mistake because white can take on f6, but black has a plan of blockade in mind which renews the idea that this is going to be a quick draw. He runs his king round to f7, he plays his bishop to f5, and after king g1 the 2 players agree to a draw. White can't see any way at all of enforcing the move g4. This is his problem here. Even if he plays a move like rook g1, let's say, black puts his rook in on e3, and then g4 takes, rook h1, rook h8, something like this. This is not a good idea for white. So a draw it was, a good way to close our discussion of knight d7. So just going back to the opening one more time. Knight d7, a good way of trying to neutralise white's opening system with 3d4. Black simply threatens to take the knight on e5 and then develop comfortably with moves like bishop e7 and, as described, c6, etc. This is a good way of playing for black, very reliable and used at the highest level. If white players aren't satisfied with the types of position that they get after knight takes e5 in this position, then you might find yourself having to face d takes e5, a less common move than knight takes e5, but it has been played recently by a lot of strong players. doubtless, from my perspective, due to their dissatisfaction of the positions white achieves after knight takes e5, knight d7. Now, the main thing about d takes e5, it's more dangerous than it looks. White's pawn on e5 can frustrate black's development, but I don't think black should overcomplicate his defence in this position. The important thing is to continue developing quickly and freely in the true style of the open game. And so the best way here is to play knight c6 and then bishop e7. To my mind, this is very straightforward. Just get the pieces out. Now, my first game comes from the FIDE World Championship knockout tournament in 2000 between two grandmasters, Vladislav Nevednici playing with white, 2582, and a very strong grandmaster from Bologna, Jerome Piquet, who regrettably I think appears to have retired from chess, but around that time, 10-12 years ago, he was exceptionally strong. And Nevednici played knight c3. Well, with this move, white offers a kind invitation to black. Please double my pawns. I don't think black should do this. The motivation behind this is that white gets considerable freedom of movement from his pieces. He gets the open b file. He gets to play a whole series of natural moves. This is not what we want at all. And he can always dissolve his double pawns if he wants to with a well-timed c4. No, this will undoubtedly give white the better game. Much better, and in the true style of the open game, is bishop f5, and that's the move Piquet played, giving the knight on e4 additional reinforcement, just getting the pieces out. This is what I mean by not an especially complicated approach from black. Well, white played queen e1. There are other moves here, among which rook e1 is by far the most common, but queen e1 just gives additional pressure to the knight on e4. But Piquet played knight b4. Good move tactically, aiming at both c2 and d3, making it quite difficult for white to actually win a pawn with ease in this position. So white played knight to d4. Well, if white takes on e4 with the knight, then I think knight takes d3 was the intention, and then something like this. White's won a pawn, but actually his position is a total mess. I can't really recommend this to white at all. Probably black's going to regain the pawn in due course, and then white will be left with a really horrible defensive game. So going back to the game itself, Nevednici started some complications with knight d4 and then played f4. Black played c5, and white must continue with forcing play f5. Black took on d3, a very important move, getting rid of the bishop. White recaptured, and now black took on d4. White took on g6, black must recapture, and now white took on e4 with the knight. Obviously, if white takes on e4 with the pawn, then black takes on c3 with a very satisfactory game. So going back to the game itself, white took on e4, black recaptured, white took with the queen, white played queen b6, black played queen b6, and now white played b3. So white can only hope for a small advantage at best in this position, and what he's trying to do is to prove that his bishop is superior to black's bishop. He's honing in on the pawn at d4. White's problem with this plan is that actually his own pawn on e5 is just as weak as the pawn on d4. Now Nevednici played rook a c1. Well, when I first saw this position I thought rook f3 was the move, with the idea of perhaps doubling up on the f-file to create an attack. But then I think black puts a very good plan into action. He plays queen b5, rook a f1, and then rook d5. Just dropping back one move, it's worthwhile noting that bishop takes d4 is absolutely not possible here, due to rook takes d4, and then bishop c5. So rook a f1, rook d5, there in essence is white's problem. He hasn't got the time really to zero in on the pawn at d4. Chances are balanced in this position. So Nevednici, going back to the game itself, played rook a c1, black played bishop g5, very good, and Piquet put his bishop in on e3. So much for the bad black squared bishop. King went into the corner, rook f e8, bishop a3, and now f5, blocking white out. After queen f3, rook takes e5 signalled that black's strategy had been a success, and now white is really struggling to get any sort of game. Nevednici seems not really to know what to do here. For black it's much easier. He angles for a better endgame, getting his pieces into superior locations before swapping off. And after rook takes c4, b takes c4, queen a5, Neveniji saw, to his dismay, that he was in a winning fork from black's perspective. So white resigned. Now, not all the games are going to go as smoothly as that, but let us make a preliminary assessment that knight c6, bishop e7 and then bishop f5 is a good way to play. You will recall that we are looking at the slightly uncommon capture after d5, d takes e5, and I'm recommending the move knight c6. Well, in the game Swarovski versus Stankovic, Belgrade 2004, white castled, and now black played bishop g4. White played bishop f4 and black played bishop e7. White played c3 and black castled. It's unlikely that natural development along these lines can disturb the black position. Black is able to develop his minor pieces, as you will see, as you have seen, very effectively indeed, and he's now thinking about getting his major pieces in the game. So white tries to stop the obvious plan of queen up and then rook across with queen e2, and black decides to play a bit more actively than he has done so far by playing f5. White takes on f6. Well, if he doesn't take, black has two plans really. Black's got the plan of moving a knight to e6. One way you can do this is just to go queen d7 and bring the knight around to this beautiful square. That's one plan. A second plan, white leaves the pawn structure as it is simply to advance with g5 and try and get a kingside attack. So white tries to break this up by capturing on f6. Black recaptures with the rook, and now you can see already white is getting into some trouble here because he's got some problems on the f-file. Swarovski retreated his bishop. Well, if white takes on e4 in this position, I don't think that solves the problem. Black takes on f4, and there's going to be a double pawn on f3 very soon. That's exactly what happens in the game. White plays bishop g3, black takes on f3, and then plays knight g5. And this really is no advert for white's system. The next stage is what to do next. So Stankovic moves in with the knight and occupies the nice f4 square with his knight. White plays queen e3. He can't really give up the dark squared bishop at this stage, and black plays queen f8. The regrouping plan employed by Stankovic is quite nice in this game. Queen f7 was played. A twofold idea behind that move. First one, enabling the rook to come across to f8. Secondly, if need be, black can move his queen out to h5 at a moment's notice. White's got to try to find some targets, so he plays rook a d1 and black plays bishop d6, nice reinforcement of the knight. And after knight d4, black played knight e5. So this game really has proceeded on oiled wheels. As advertised, the queen comes out to h5. Well, also a very good move in this position. There is a problem with taking this knight here. I think black can actually take that, and if white recaptures, any move with the knight really will uncover an attack against the queen, and h2 is on pre beyond. So after knight e2 by white, black played knight c4, knight takes f4, bishop takes f4. White had to move his queen, and now black played the reinforcement c6. So it's still going extremely well, and black is in full command of the tactics, noting that bishop takes f4 this time is answered by queen takes f3 check. So white went king g2. Now black swings his rook across right on time. Bishop b3, knight e5, threatening f3, a move which white finds impossible to stop. He plays rook d, e1, knight takes f3, forking, and now it's much easier. Obviously, black could take on e1 with check if he wanted to, but he decides to play bishop takes g3, f takes g3, queen takes h2, mate. So in this line where white plays d takes e5, black, it seems, can get a nice active game by going bishop g4. One last look at this main line with d takes e5 should convince you that this is not a particularly effective way to go for white. We're going to look at the game Bartel versus Galkin from the World Cup in Khanty-Mansisk in 2007. White castled and black played the active move bishop g4. And now Bartel tried something unusual to justify his opening setup. He played bishop b5. We've seen that if white just develops pieces, black can easily do the same. He can bring his bishop out, he can castle, he can easily deploy his major pieces. So bishop b5 trying to upset the apple cart, but this does not interfere with black's smooth development. And Galkin plays bishop c5. White plays h3. No reason to give up the bishop just yet. And now knight c3. Knight takes c3, b takes c3, and black castle. So another example between top grandmasters where white has failed to get anything whatsoever from the opening. While Bartel goes into action with g4, he wants to break the pin, and he's trying to get the light square bishops off the board. But Galkin will only agree to that exchange on his own terms, and he puts his bishop in on e4. A good move, with white's pawn structure looking very, very ragged. And after rook e1, black was able to play f5. Of course, if white takes on f6 here, he just simply unleashes the energy of all of black's pieces, and white's king looks very, very weak. So Bartel blocked with g5, and black parked his king in the corner. Just a safety move, getting ready to try to take advantage of the weaknesses around the white king. White played bishop f4, black played queen e8. Excellent stuff. The queen's coming out maybe to the king side. Bishop drops back to defend, and now Galkin completes development. So d takes e5, as you can see, is not a variation to worry about. With natural moves, you will get a good game. It remains to see how black is going to exploit his advantage in this game, and he does so with d4, a thematic move opening up the position whilst black has extra pieces in play. White's rook on a1 looks out of the game, so black just opens things up. And Bartel played a rather miserable move here, queen to e2. Well, of course, if he takes on d4, knight takes d4, white has a multitude of weaknesses to look after. If he takes on d4, black just takes with the bishop, with numerous threats. Bishop takes a1, bishop takes f2, check winning the queen. White is hopelessly lost. So white's probably got to go knight d2, and then just knight e6 is good enough, keeping the knight on d2 pinned. If bishop e3, we just go takes, 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 and now, well, white is in a desperate condition. Black can play queen d7, he could even take on g5. Either way, white is lost. So Bartel played queen e2, Galkin took on c3, rook a d1, but this can't be a solution. g6, another desperate move, just to try and get some room. Queen e6, rook takes d8. To at least this way, white achieves a centralised queen, but he does allow the black queen into h3. Knight comes back to g2, knight comes into d4, threatening knight f3 check, rook e3 stops it for an instant, queen g4. There are just too many threats that the black can muster around the white king. So b6, no need for heroics, and queen g6, everything's under control. Rook g3 is answered by knight e2 check, and bishop e5 by knight f5. Rook f3 was answered by rook g8, careful move, king f1, knight e7. Although the pawn on e6 looks a bit scary, there's really nothing white can do with it. So queen e4, well, that exposes the weakness in white's camp. There are pieces now on pre. White went in for bishop g7, knight h5, but then queen takes f3 clarified the situation, and the white resigned. So just going back and reviewing the situation for the last time, the variation with d takes e5 is not dangerous. Black may proceed comfortably with knight c6 and bishop g4. We move on now to examining some of the rarer lines that white can play against the Petrov, mainly for reasons of novelty, surprise, or just to break the monotony. And one of these is knight to c4. This is an older line, occasionally seen from time to time in high-level chess. It doesn't pose any particular problems to black, but one of white's main ideas is to reposition this knight on e3. I know that sounds a bit odd, but from e3 the knight is monitoring a whole range of important squares. So to see how this all works out, my first game will be the game Savchenko versus Kazimzhanov, and this was played in Plovdiv in 2010 in the European Cup. White played d4 and black played d5, knight comes to e3, and now Kazimzhanov played bishop to e7. The thing about the Petrov, the thing you have to remember is, if you encounter a variation you've never seen before, it's unlikely that it's going to be that good. What you have to try to do then is concentrate on natural, straightforward development, typical of the open game. Develop quickly, pointedly, controlling the centre. You shouldn't go far wrong. So even if you don't know anything about knight c4, you've hardly ever seen it before, it should be possible to meet it using fairly straightforward means, because the Petrov is that type of opening. And that's exactly what Kazimzhanov does here. He plays bishop e7. White plays knight d2. Now, what you have to understand is Kazimzhanov's quite a bit higher rated than Savchenko, despite the fact they're grandmasters. So, White plays knight d2, and now Black refrains from exchanging, for two reasons. Number one, he makes it more difficult for White to unravel the queen side. Why should he take that knight? Develop the White's bishop for him. And secondly, he, by refusing to exchange pieces, keeps the tension in the position. So after bishop d3 c5, Black has already got a nice free game. And despite the fact that Black's got an isolated pawn here, now actually that knight on e3 is getting in the way to an extent, which is why after castles, Savchenko hastens to move it to f5. But once again, Black sticks with straightforward development, and he hopes this will solve his problems. So White plays his bishop to g5, and Black takes off the knight on f5. This may seem like a small concession, giving up the two bishops, but it speeds along with development and enables Black to get out of the pin comfortably with queen to d6. Note here that the exchange on f6 is never a big deal for Black, because after queen takes b5, he's actually got knight e7 in this position, winning the bishop. So going back, White played queen to f3, Black played his queen to e5, rook fe1, and now Black played his knight into e4. A nice little tactical trick based around the unprotected bishop on g5. While Savchenko retreated the bishop to d2, and Kazimzhanov showed bravery by coming down and taking on b2, allowing White to take twice on e4, but then Black retreats with queen f6. So we've had 20 or so moves, and what is wrong with Black's game? He's got every piece in play, he's got the better pawn structure. It seems to me that this bishop on b6 is more active than White's bishop, and that the only thing Black's got to watch out for is some sort of tactical accident immediately, because, well, all his pieces are on dark squares, the same colour as White's bishop. But Kazimzhanov manages to sidestep that fairly easily. So queen c4 was answered by rook e6, another nice move, eyeing up f2, bishop e3, and now there are some exchanges. And Black played queen b2. So the game's continuing. Black's still slightly better, but it's one of those positions that, well, it's a question of whether you can win. You might have a slight advantage here, but it's quite something else, translating the better pawn structure on the queen side into something tangible. Well, somehow White's more active, and that's compensating him for the fact that his pawn structure's worse. So knight d2, knight a5, queen a4, knight c6, that more or less offers a draw, and now White gives his king a bit of luft on the back row. Rook d8 was answered by knight f3, and it's now about time that Black did the same. After queen b3, queen takes b3, the writing was on the wall. We are heading for a drawn game, and that's exactly what happened. As the rooks came off, Black brought his king into the centre, so did White. Knight c2, f5, and now with the pawn structure symmetrical, the two grandmasters agreed to a draw. So just to recap, against knight c4, keep it simple. Take, yes, let the knight go to e3. After that you can just develop sensibly with bishop e7, and should have a fairly comfortable game in the way you develop your forces. In the coming game, from the Politican Cup of 2009, White tries another novel way of developing his forces in the knight c4 variation. He plays queen to e2. This is the game between two grandmasters, Emanuel Berg from Sweden and Peter Heine Nielsen from Denmark. Well, Black played his queen to e7, and again White put his knight on e3. So we see now that White is threatening a game-winning move here, knight d5. So Black's got to be a bit careful. But you see, what has Black done wrong in this position? Nothing at all. The only thing that looks weird about this line, really, is the position of both the other guy's queens. Burke plays b3, intending to put his bishop on the long diagonal. Well, all this takes time, and black uses that time to get his pieces out. So after b3, knight c6, bishop b2, Nielsen played bishop e6, white went g3, and now black played d5, bishop g2, castles on the queen side. Well, I suppose Berg is arguing that whilst he has managed to solve the riddle of that bishop on f1, black has still to get this bishop on f8 out. Nielsen isn't too concerned about that. He hits with h5. White played knight d2, black played g6, so there we are. Black is thinking about bishop g7, or maybe even bishop h6, which would be a very active location for the bishop. White castled on the queen side, and now with the obvious target on c1, black deploys his bishop actively to h6. So again, one of those positions where white's novel play in the opening hasn't come to anything, and after 15 moves, black is fully developed and has a perfectly good game. You can't really complain as black if you get a position like this out of the opening. Not much exchange now, very complex position. Black may or may not be threatening to take this pawn on d4. At any rate, white thinks he is, so he plays queen d3 to protect. And now Heine Nielsen plays knight to g4. Well, the open game means that you have to proceed with threats if you can. You have to deploy your pieces as aggressively as you can, and this is what Nielsen does. I think white's got to take that. And now the pillar of his position, the knight on e3, has been removed. H takes g4, perhaps slightly surprising, fixing the h pawn on h2 and preparing bishop f5. b4. Well, that's a pretty ugly move, but there might have been some combination here with bishop f5 coming up, bishop takes d2, and then suddenly queen takes b3. So white is anxious to stop this, but he runs straight into a5. b takes a5, knight takes a5, queen to c3, bishop takes d2, surrendered for a specific reason. Nielsen gets to put his knight in on c4. So all this strange manoeuvring by white in the opening has absolutely come to naught, and he's now facing the firing squad on the queen side. Bishop f1, trying to get rid of the knight. Black is happy to exchange, and then he plays his rook to h8. Now we see the added value of the pawn on g4. Rook e3 was answered by queen takes b2 check. Nielsen keeps it simple now. He's won a pawn. Thank you very much. Now it's a question of whether black can realise the extra pawn. Bishop f5 not only activates the bishop, it vacates the e file for use with rook e6. So white tries to break all this up. Nielsen plays his bishop into e4, and now he's thinking about rook f6. Bishop e2, well, that's a trick. Rook takes f2, bishop takes g4 check, but f5 bolsters the position. c5 was answered by rook d8, and now black brings the other rook across. King c3, rook h1. Basically white is now just a pawn down for nothing, and black infiltrates. Very nice indeed. Bishop takes e4, f takes e4. We have double rook endgame on the board. Not especially difficult from black's perspective. Rook d1, king c3, king b8, a4, and after that, again, black either won on time or white resigned. White can't get his rook into the game. White's got numerous weak pawns to look after, and black threatens nothing other than simply bringing his king up to a5. I don't think white can stop it. So, to summarise, I don't think you're going to see knight c4 very often. I don't think this plan of rerouting the knight to e3 is a particularly good one, but it's tricky. Stick to the normal tram lines, get your pieces developed, eye the centre, cover d5, you're going to be fine. Well, now we come to a very rare idea, one which I believe was first played by Morozevich, whereby after knight f3, knight takes e4, white plays the immediate bishop d3. Now this looks like a total beginner's move, but black has to be careful after this, because white intends to redeploy this bishop very quickly after c3, bishop backs to c2, and then d4, after which the bishop is on quite a strong diagonal. To illustrate how black might play, I've chosen the very high level game David Navarra, white, against Boris Gelfand, black, and this game was played in Vaikensee in 2012. Gelfand just dropped his knight back to f6, and now white played h3, which takes away bishop g4 from black. Quite a useful move if black is allowed to play it. So Gelfand just developed modestly with bishop e7, both sides castled, and now white put his plan into action after c3. So this is white's idea, to put the bishop on c2 and then to play d4, hoping that his bishops will be aggressively posted against the black king. And note how useful bishop g4 would have been to black in this position. So Gelfand's got to find another location for the bishop on c8, therefore he played the modest bishop b6 and then bishop b7. But the only drawback to white's idea, of course, is that it's cost white a couple of moves to put his bishop on c2, and black has used those moves to complete his minor piece development. So white probably has a very slight edge here, more space, two dangerous looking bishops, but black continues apace with development and really doesn't experience too much difficulty in this game. Again, black sticks to the basics, he gets his pieces out, so rook e8 is very much a move along those lines. Navarro played knight c4 and black just dropped his bishop back economically, hoping to put the brakes on the white bishop pair by playing g6 soon. Bishop g5 was answered by h6 and bishop h4 by g6. Knight e3 and now bishop g7. We'll reach a position where really if white can't take advantage of black's slightly less space here, then he's going to have nothing. No, white hasn't developed his queen or rooks yet. He spent a lot of time manoeuvring his minor pieces into what look like very good squares, but what does it all amount to? Black's position is very solid and his defences are difficult to breach. Now white tried in the game knight h2, just letting the queen out, maybe preparing knight g4. Rook e1 looks slightly more natural to me, and I want to get out of the pin after that with queen c8. This looks like the most solid, and then perhaps put the bishop in the centre. Very satisfactory position for black. In the game, Navarro played knight h2, black got out of the pin, and white played knight g4. And probably Gelfand was satisfied to see that move because, you know, he's got slightly less space, so exchanging off the pieces helps him. Now f5, changing gears, not allowing the knight to stay on g4 for any length of time, and knight f6. Again, throughout this game white looks as though he's got a nice position, but he has not yet moved his queen or rooks. This is an important point, and this means that the white initiative really isn't very dangerous. Rook e1 was answered by king h8 and f3 by queen d7. Queen d2 was answered by knight d5, Gelfand neutralising any white initiative with threat of exchanges, and now just king h7. Bishop b3, and now there were some trades. Rook e8. Really this game is not too difficult to understand. Bishop c2, bishop d5. Black is manoeuvring, fully satisfactory position, and after bishop f6 he offered a draw, which was accepted. Clearly white can't take on h6 in this position because of rook takes e1 check, winning a piece, so the two great players agreed to a draw. So after bishop d3, as long as you're aware of what white is trying to do, then it should be fairly easy to handle black's position. What you don't want to do is to develop carelessly and end up with white's bishops on c2 and c1 threatening to start an attack against your king. Knight f6, well, not everybody might play h3 here. For instance, some people might just castle lazily, allowing you to bring your bishop out to g4. I think this is very satisfactory for black. But if they play h3, just develop like Gelfand did, b6, bishop b7. It seems perfectly satisfactory. Continuing our investigation of unusual ways to meet the Petrov from white's perspective, we now come to the move c4. This is quite rare, but you do see it from time to time, even at the highest level. And of course the main motivation behind it is that white is trying to dissuade black from freeing his game with d5. Later on white hopes to perhaps play d4, bishop d3, and then just continue as normal. A slight tweak in the move order then from white. And now we follow the game Nisipianu versus Anish Giri, and this game was played in Vaikensee in 2010. As usual, when we're confronted with something unusual in the Petrov, we have the opportunity just to continue with very natural developing moves, and that's exactly what Geary does in this game. He brings his knight out to c6. White plays bishop e2. I suppose white could go d4 in this position, then I think black was intending to go d5. And then bishop b4 check is threatened, as well as castles after that. This should be okay for black. So Nisipianu maintains a fairly independent course with bishop e2, and both sides just get their pieces out. Now white plays d4, as advertised. Well, black could certainly go d5 here. There's nothing wrong with that. I suppose after d5 we could get a sequence something like takes, queen takes, knight c3, knight takes c3, and then black brings his bishop out either to g4 or bishop f5. Both of these seem perfectly reasonable approaches for black. But Geary decides, going back to the game, just to play bishop f6. And now he's thinking about bishop g4 to put pressure on d4. So Nisipianu pushes forward, black brings the knight back, and now white brings his knight into d4. Rook comes to e8, white brings his knight out to f3. That knight on e4 is certainly inhibiting white to a degree, and now black brings his knight up to f5 to try to exchange off white's centralised knight, whereupon white tries to maintain his knight with knight ac2. Alright, now comes knight c5. That threatens to win a piece by just taking twice on d4, after which the bishop on e2 hangs. So white retreated with knight b3. The open game is all about time, really, and accurate development. Black could take on b3 here, but that of course would allow white's rook to come into the game free of charge. So Geary just settles for bishop d7, allowing white to double the pawns on c5. Now what have we got here? Well, for 14 moves, it's a fairly balanced position. Black is slightly ahead in development. On the other hand, he's got the worst pawn structure. But to compensate him for the pawn structure, he's got a lovely square on d6 for the knight. He's got a nice open diagonal for his bishop, which is tying white down to a degree. It's certainly keeping the bishop on c1 under observation. And white can't really achieve very much in this position. Bishop d3, pawn up to a5, white vacates the long diagonal, and now h6 was played. So just by common sense moves, black is easily maintaining the balance. And with knight d6, he continues to do so. So white wants to activate his rook now. He wants to challenge the e-file, so he has to play b3, another kind of wasted move. And now Geary starts to gain some space. He plays bishop e5, white plays h3, and now black plays f5. Rook fe1 as advertised, queen f6. So the f5 pawn is giving black the opportunity to mass his forces behind the pawn, and both sides now double rooks in the e-file. One still gets the impression this is a very balanced position. But now Nisipianu misses a little trick here. He plays queen h5, and Geary, perhaps slightly surprisingly, plays g6. Not sure whether Nisipianu was expecting that, but the tactical point of this move is that white can't take on h6. If he takes on h6, black plays knight f7 attacking the queen. Queen goes back, and now black wins the queen by discovered attack. So going back to the game, Nisipianu's got to sound the retreat, and this gives black more time to mass his forces, which he does with knight f7, white plays bishop f4, and now black plays king to g7. Well, black could have opened a file on the queen side. He can play a move like a4 here, and if white goes g3, takes, and only now king g7, king g2, queen d6. I still like this position for black. That pawn on f5 gives black good strong grip on the centre of the board, and black should have a slight advantage here. But king g7, well, we can't fault what happens in the game. White played queen g3, black took on f4. He played knight e5, very slightly embarrassing this because the knight's dominating this bishop. White retreated his queen to protect the bishop, and now pawn up to f4. And now black's advantage is really starting to increase. Well, in the game, white made a mistake. I think he was quite shocked about how the game had developed against him, and he played bishop to e4. Now, if he stops the advance of the f-pawn, or tries to, then black has the splendid move bishop takes h3. You don't need to do that. I mean, you can maintain an advantage here just by simply putting the queen in on g3. I think this is quite difficult to meet. And if bishop e4, then knight f7. This is quite difficult to meet as well. Black is much better here. Bishop takes h3 is quite interesting too. White must take on e5, takes, and then check, and then rook h5. This gives black a dangerous attack. But as I say, there's no need to take even the slightest risk here. So after f3, maybe queen g5. But going back to the game, bishop e4 was played, and this allowed bishop takes h3 anyway. And I don't think that he was expecting this at all. White played queen to c3. Black played bishop to g4. Well, f3 was also good. But bishop g4 is crushing straight away. Out of nowhere, black has developed a winning attack. And of course, the point of it is that if white blocks, let's say with f3, he suddenly finds that his queen's on pre on c3. That is the difficulty with this position. White's queen is in the wrong place. So to cut a long story short, I mean there's probably more than one good way to meet c4, but I quite like Geary's straightforward way of just getting the pieces out here. There's nothing wrong with it for black. We are reaching the end of our tour of Petrov's defence, but before I go, I want to show you another one of these sidelines that white could play. To me, they represent an admission of defeat on white's part, a recognition that he can't really get anything substantial against black's very logical opening. And here he's trying the move 5d3. Now this move looks extremely passive, blocking in the bishop on f1. When the knight retreats, white goes d4. Two moves with the d-pawn. Yet, amazingly, this variation has been played by Magnus Carlsen in 2012 and by attacking grandmasters in the past, such as Nigel Short. It's basically an attempt just to get a different type of position, to send the black knight back to f6, and to encourage black to play a symmetrical position here, where white has the extra move. Castles, castles, you could say this is the main line of this variation. White has several plans. One plan might be to break with c4. One plan might be to bring his knight out to c3. At any rate, if we return to d3, basically, when some guy plays this and he's prepared it, he's not going to keep that pawn on d3 for very long. Now, to illustrate how black might play against this line, let's look at the game Nigel Short, white, against Pentala Hari Krishna, the very strong Indian grandmaster playing black. And this game was played in Montreal in 2007. And here, black simply copied white's moves. White played h3, and black played h6. Both of these moves take away bishop g4 and bishop g5 respectively. And now white has to decide how he wants to play this variation. What's he going to try to get out of this, well, what looks like a dead level position? Well, Short played knight c3, and Carlsen, in his game from 2012, played c4, trying to open up the game. Now, it's clear that black should have adequate resources against c4, but allow me to suggest just a simple move: d takes c4 and then bishop f5, knight c3, knight bd7. This to me looks like an entirely logical way of playing as black. You're going knight b6, you're going c6, and you're going to try and strong point the square d5. By these means, I should think black gets a very easy game against c4. But going back to Short versus Hari Krishna, white played knight c3, evidently thinking about maybe knight b5, so black stopped it with c6, rook e1, and now Hari Krishna just played rook e8. Remember the golden rule in the Petrov: when you're confronted with something unusual, stick to the basics. White takes the open file, black challenges the open file. Well, Short takes on e8, and black recaptures with the knight. Clearly black could take with the queen in this position. What he was probably afraid of was that Short would play eventually a rook to e1. Maybe he starts with bishop e3 in this position, then he puts his queen on d2, then his rook comes across to e1. Okay, then the black queen might have to move again. But Hari Krishna plays knight takes e8, and this allows him to easily marshal his forces. Knight comes into e5, less dangerous than it looks. Black challenges the knight, bishop f4, and now Hari Krishna lies back on the ropes, just challenging white to demonstrate some advantage here. Where are the weak points in black's camp? Well, maybe f7, and Short tries to target that with queen h5. Now he's not only threatening f7, he's maybe thinking about sacrifices on h6. Hare Krishna is unmoved, he just defends f7. And now, well, it's very hard to see how white continues to make progress here. Black certainly has a counter-attacking idea in the position of queen b6, attacking b2 and d4. And without any clear threats, that knight on f8 is really doing a good job defending. Well, I suppose if short play rook e1 in this position, then black could go queen b6. So he plays a very strange move, most unshort-like here, rook b1. That's a recognition that black certainly has counterplay here. And now black goes up a gear. He plays f6. Short puts his knight in on g6. Bishop comes back to f7. Suddenly, perhaps white is in trouble. Bishop takes d6, knight takes d6. Pawn up to g4, and poor Nigel has overlooked something. Black played the classic interference move here, knight e4, and suddenly white was lost. So in 19 moves, all of white's attacking ideas came to naught, and he now finds that his knight on g6 is catastrophically pinned. There's no way out. If knight takes e4, then we just go bishop takes g6, winning material. So I think we can conclude that d3 won't be seen most often. If it's played at club level, it will be played just as a kind of passive idea. And certainly in the main line, where black is just sensibly copying white's moves, it's very difficult for white to get anything at all. To close this DVD then, I'd like to show you where the Petrov really does strike hard. It gives us all a good feeling about the opening. The Petrov is sometimes presented as a very dry opening, but in fact, especially at club level, it can be very tactical. The opening skirmish is highly characteristic of the open game. Piece placement's important, going for the initiative is important, and if you think about it, black's second move, knight f6, is much more aggressive than knight c6. Knight c6 merely defends the pawn on e5. The Petrov is a counter-attacking opening, and this is the philosophy we have to keep in mind when we adopt to knight f6. Just remember that the Petrov is an aggressive defence based on counter-attack. So, which brings us to the game Alexander Shabalov versus Daniel Friedman. Two very aggressive players, two grandmasters, and this game was played in, I think it was Lithuania, in 2001. I say this because the name of the town is Lipajas. You're never quite sure with some of these Scandinavian type names where exactly on the planet that these guys are playing. It could be Estonia, it could be Finland, not quite sure. Anyway, somewhere in those regions. And in this game, Shabalov played d4. Black took on e4, that's our repertoire, and after knight takes e5, we're playing knight d7. This is something I've concentrated on extensively on the DVD. Well, Shabalov took on d7, and we got this position where white castled. Black stations his bishops very aggressively on d6 and d7, and now white pushes in the centre with c4. White's always trying to do that in the Petrov defence to undermine the position of the strong knight on e4. That's knight's getting in white's way, and he wants to move it aside. Well, Friedman played c6, and now Shabalov played queen to c2. Black gambited a pawn. Well, this decision is a decision clearly in the style of players like Frank Marshall. Marshall in the old days loved the Petrov defence. He used to win lots of games with it, and he treated it as a counter-attacking opening. In this case, black's giving up the pawn on e4, and he gets Marshall Gambit-like compensation. The two raking bishops, the active rook first to the e-file, and white hasn't developed a single queenside piece yet. So all these features mean that black has very good compensation for the pawn, and he continued the attack with queen h4. Well, white really does not want to be playing g3 in this position. Clearly that must be a positional mistake. Not only does that encourage the black queen to come very close to white's king, it also gives this light square bishop unrivaled scope. White doesn't have a white square bishop in this position, so he really doesn't want to unleash this piece against his poor king. So Shabalov decided to play h3 to try and shut down the bishop. Now, white could also have played f4, trying to block black's dark square bishop on d6 out of the game. Against that, g6 is a good move. and that prepares bishop f5. Basically this bishop on d7 is the piece white doesn't have. Black is looking to activate that bishop at the earliest possible opportunity, and now black gets good compensation. However, white's played. If he goes knight c3, we go bishop f5, and then we just play our rook to the centre. Excellent compensation for black in this position. Now just going back to g6, if he goes knight d2, planning to bring the knight over to f3, well, bishop f5, then queen b3, and now we put our rook in on e2. Again, this is very dangerous. If white gobbles the pawn, we double up. Perfect coordination for black, and although white is quite a few pawns up in this position, as you can see, he's getting into trouble. I would not like to be white in this position. Just a sample, if he gobbles this pawn, we take on f4, he goes knight f3, queen g4. You can see the problems that white is encountering suddenly. So going back to the game, Shabalov played h3, and now Friedman played a very good move here, rook to e4, bringing the rook into the centre of the board, threatening directly rook takes d4, and should white play bishop e3 in this position, then black has the splendid move bishop takes h3, and if g takes h3, queen takes h3. This is the sort of reason why Marshall played this opening in the long distant past, to get an attacking position like this. Going back to rook e4, white can try rook d1 just defending, then black coordinates with rook a d8, and if bishop e3, again we crunch in with bishop takes h3. Perhaps it's even stronger this time. G takes h3, queen takes h3, and the white king is not long for this world. Just note, in this position, the two undeveloped white pieces on the queen side. So rook e4 is a very good move, and Shabalov tried to counter this tactically with bishop to g5. Rook takes d4 was Friedman's move. If white takes the queen, black will do likewise. And now, under pressure, white made a mistake. He played queen to c3. Well, we can all make such moves. I think white should have played queen e3 here. Black plays queen e4, then something like knight c3, just to try and alleviate the pressure by exchanging pieces. Again, I don't think black should play ball here. I think rather than take the queen on e3, which is a bit mechanical, black plays queen e5. Any advantage there is in this position must lie with black. He's got the bishop here, view of queen h2 mate. White's probably got to exchange the queens, and now white has problems really. The pawn on c4 is weak, black's bishops are going to be very strong. Very difficult for white. Let's run this one more time to see if white can't do better. Well, maybe he should just settle for takes, and then knight c3. Although even here, and that sets a trap by the way, if rook takes c4, then white goes rook a d1. But I think if black just plays rook e6, again we get the same sort of thing. White's almost equal, but not quite. It's black who's playing for the win here, I would say. Going back to the game then, in this wide open position, Shabalov played queen c3, and got a bit of shock now, as black sacrificed the exchange. He played queen takes g5, queen takes d4, and now bishop takes h3. White thought he was defending himself against the mate. Black played a deflection, f5, and in order to keep track of the position, to keep pace with the attack on g2, white retreated to f3. Bishop g4, queen b3, kicking white around, and now the king went into the corner. So that, after queen takes b7, black played rook d8. Well, here we are. Black's still got his attack. As yet, white has three pieces on the back rank which aren't doing anything. Shabalov thought he could get away with queen takes c6 here, but now came queen f6. And this is a graphic reminder why in the open game actually development is worth more than riches. I think that was an old phrase coined by the 19th century masters. If you get too greedy in the open game, it really does react against you. And here, white is threatened with two things. Number one, he's threatened with bishop h2 check, winning the queen. And number two, black is also threatening b2. White went queen b7, hoping to defend himself. Queen h6, that was the point. Now white's got to play this horrible move, g3. The only chance now is that the white queen can hold off the bishop, but Friedman moved in with f4. Before white ever gets the chance to develop any of his pieces in this game, he's going to be murdered in his bed. While knight c3 was Shabalov's move, Friedman opened up the king there. Very unpleasant indeed. Obviously he can't take this. Well, he can, but of course he runs into bishop c5 check. If he goes queen e4, we can play queen g5. White is in a terrible mess. He tried queen f3, and now another splendid move to finish, bishop g4. And tired of the pummeling, Friedman resigned. He resigns due to the nice tactic queen h1, g2. This is a splendid move. If king takes g2, black has queen f4. When his attack is unstoppable. If he takes with the queen, then bishop f3 is again a lovely deflection. If queen takes f3, queen h2 mate. Otherwise the white queen is overloaded. So that is really a first-class example of the type of tactical play black can bring to bear in the Petrov. That was a superb display.